In the shadows of Europe's grand cathedrals and beneath the banners of crusading armies, there were whispers, faint echoes of cloaked men exchanging coded phrases in candlelit chambers. While the Knights Templar are most often remembered as holy warriors in gleaming white mantles, behind that noble image lies a far more intricate and hidden story, one woven with secrecy, silent missions, and a web of medieval espionage so vast it nearly vanished from the written record. Tonight, we step away from the familiar legends of treasure and betrayal to explore the lesser-known paths the Templars once walked, paths shrouded not in glory, but in mystery. What messages traveled across the dusty roads between Jerusalem and Paris, carried not by knights in shining armor, but by quiet messengers disguised as pilgrims? What deals were struck in the back rooms of sultans' palaces, far from the watchful eyes of the Pope? And what truths did the Templars guard, not just with sword and shield, but with silence? This is not the story told in textbooks or tourist brochures. These are the tales murmured in the corners of libraries, hidden between forgotten parchments, and speculated on by historians who know that power in the Middle Ages was as much about secrets as it was about swords. In this journey, you will hear of infiltrators and informants, of false identities and forbidden alliances. You will wander through ancient fortresses that held not just gold, but coded messages etched into stone. You will listen to stories of knights who vanished into enemy territory, only to return years later with knowledge far more dangerous than any weapon. As your mind begins to drift into that calm space between waking and sleep, allow the stories of medieval shadows to unfold. Let the wind carry the whispers of centuries past. 1. The Silent Messenger of Acre, 1270. The heat of the Levant sun simmered upon limestone walls, baked golden by centuries of siege and sanctity. This was no longer the bustling gateway of the Crusader dream. It was a fortress caught between survival and collapse. The Templar stronghold here stood like a last breath of the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem, clinging to the edge of a crumbling world. But it was not the clang of swords, nor the echo of war that defined the fate of this place. It was something much quieter, something far more elusive. It was a message, not a decree from a pope, not an order from a grandmaster, but a single parchment, folded thrice, sealed with black wax-knot red and hidden in the hem of a pilgrim's cloak. The pilgrim was no ordinary traveler. He walked without entourage, without weapon, without fear. His name, the one he used here, was Brother Matthias. No records of a Templar. Tonight by that name remain, and yet his name appears briefly once, only once in the margins of a letter stored in the Vatican archives. Brother Matthias has returned, silence confirmed. That single sentence hints at a tale buried deep beneath the sands of time. Let us imagine him now, sandaled feet, treading carefully through the dust of Acre's market square. His face was half-shadowed by a cowl, his eyes weary not from the journey, but from what he carried in memory. He did not glance twice at the Frankish merchants, nor at the Mamluk scouts pretending to be spice traders. He walked as if the world itself had asked him to disappear, and that was precisely his task. For the Templars did not rely solely on brute force to hold the Holy Land. They had, over the decades, developed a network of informants, couriers, and silent agents. Many were brothers, some were not, and a rare few like Matthias existed only in whispers. He had crossed into enemy territory not as a knight, but as a mute Armenian monk, fluent in Greek, Arabic, and the subtle dialects of Aleppo's alleyways. For 3 years, he had lived inside the Mamluk courts, sweeping temple floors, serving water to generals, overhearing campaigns being drafted beneath silken canopies. And all the while, he remembered every plan, every shift of soldiers, every code embedded in prayer. But why not write it down? Why not send the message sooner? Because in those days, parchment could be stolen, wax seals could be broken, tongues could be loosened with gold. But disciplined memory, was unbreakable. The message he carried was not merely news of a future attack. It was knowledge of a betrayal. A letter intercepted in Damascus had revealed the name of a French noble, colluding with the Mamluks in exchange for lands in Antioch. If true, the very foundation of the Crusader alliance would fracture. That was why Matthias had been recalled, not to report, but to confirm. And he had confirmed. Now, as he passed through the dark archway of the Templar quarter in Acre, his presence was barely acknowledged. 2 guards let him through without a glance. A silent nod was enough. He made his way to the underground chapel, where a man awaited him. Grand Master Guillaume de Beaujeu. The room was lit by a single torch and the quiet chant of monks preparing the midnight hour. Matthias bowed, but did not speak. He simply reached into the fold of his robe and withdrew a smooth stone on it, 3 carved lines, and a single Templar cross. The code was simple, threat verified, name attached. The Grand Master took the stone with trembling fingers. He did not ask for more. He did not need more. In the ancient ritual of the order, truth delivered by a silent brother was not to be questioned. Matthias was given sanctuary. For 3 days he remained in prayer and fasting, never once breaking silence. On the 4th day, he vanished. Some say he boarded a ship to Cyprus. Others whisper he was sent back into the desert to confirm another trail. But the message he brought would ripple far and wide. Weeks later, the noble in question was found dead, slain by thieves, the scrolls say. But those who truly knew the ways of the order understood. The Templars did not shout justice from rooftops. They etched it quietly into the stone of consequence. Historical footnotes, the echo of real shadows. While the figure of Brother Matthias is cloaked in narrative and his story mirrors as very real practices among the Templars. By the 13th century, the order had developed sophisticated systems of information exchange. Their preceptories stretched from the Holy Land to Scotland. In many cases, they used a unique form of trusted brotherhood individuals trained in languages, disguise, and observation. These men were rarely recorded by name. Their identities were masked for safety and effectiveness, and in many cases, they operated within Muslim territories not as enemies, but as shadows. It was whispered among merchants in Acre that the Templars knew more about Cairo's court than Cairo knew of its own generals. The use of silent messengers, who memorized entire documents rather than risk interceptions, not a mere invention. Both Christian and Islamic courts employed such men, trained in mental recitation, sometimes passing codes embedded in prayers, songs, or even in the sequences of finger gestures during ablutions. The notion of a message carved into a stone may seem romantic, but it reflects the Templars' affinity for symbolic, physical code. In fact, several stones recovered from Templar ruins bear curious marks believed to be cipher indicators. Some historians have theorized these were part of a visual mnemonic system, messages meant to be read only by those trained to understand their meaning. A moment of reflections. As you lie back, perhaps your eyes growing heavier, consider the world that once was, a world where messages traveled not at the speed of light, but at the pace of a man's footsteps, where silence was more powerful than speech, where trust meant staking your life on a man you'd never met, because he wore the mantle of the temple and bore a memory stronger than ink. Brother Matthias may never have been canonized in history's scrolls, but in the quiet halls of the Templar stronghold, his tale remained etched not in stone, but in silence. Sleep now, and let the story of shadows carry you gently into dreams. 2. The Courtesan's Secret, a Templar spy in the halls of the Sultan. In the golden heart of Cairo, where jasmine wafts through the marble lattice of palace walls and the call to prayer lingers in the dusk air like a sacred hymn. There once lived a woman whose name history refused to remember, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of awe. She was known only as Layla al-Rumiyya Layla, the Roman. To most, she was merely one of many favored in the court of Sultan Baybars. She walked with grace, veiled in silks of indigo and gold, her eyes lined with kohl that gave nothing away. She sang at evening banquets, poured tea for diplomats, and listened as men spoke freely in the company of beauty, forgetting caution in the haze of scented oil and sweet wine. But Layla was not what she appeared to be. Beneath the elegance, behind the veil, lived a blade forged not of steel, but of secrecy. She was a Templar agent. Whispers in the House of War. The Sultan's court, in the late 1260s, was not merely a place of governance, it was a theater of war masked in diplomacy. Baybars was no ordinary ruler. He was sharp, strategic, and ruthless. Under his reign, the Crusader states were steadily pushed back, like fading embers. Antioch had fallen. Tripoli trembled. The last strongholds of the Franks clung to the coastline. But for all his strength, the Sultan had a weakness, his court. Dozens of women, dancers, scribes, servants, and tutors lived behind the ornate mashrabiyya screens of his palace. It was there that alliances were whispered, that policies were decided not in council, but in chambers perfumed with oud and ambergris. The Templars, aware of the shifting tide, knew that military might would not win this war. Knowledge of timing, of treaties, of movements would. And so, in a daring act of espionage that likely defied both religious and cultural boundaries, they trained a woman. Some say Layla had once been a child, rescued from a raid in Anatolia. Others believe she was the daughter of a disgraced European noble, sold into slavery and educated in the languages of her captors. But in every account, one thing is certain. She was fluent in Arabic, Latin, and the silent art of listening. Her assignment was not to kill, it was to hear. The ink beneath the perfume. Layla's evenings were filled with music, but her mornings were for memory. Behind her mirror, hidden in a hollowed comb, she stored slivers of parchment no bigger than a fingernail. Using pomegranate juice and clove ash, she wrote down fragments, names, places, times, just enough to make sense to the reader trained in code. Once a fortnight, a merchant of Venetian spice would arrive at the Cairo bazaar. His real cargo was not cinnamon, but secrets. Layla would slip the messages into hollow beads woven into a strand of prayer rope, which he would purchase at an inflated price. But espionage is never without cost. One evening, a visiting Seljuk ambassador, sharp-eyed and suspicious, noticed a phrase Layla used that was distinctly Frankish in rhythm. He mentioned it in jest, over wine, but Layla's heart froze. That night, she burned every note she had hidden. For a week, she remained inside, claiming illness. Then, in a show of brilliance or desperation, she composed a song in Arabic, praising the ambassador's homeland with poetic metaphors only a scholar would understand. It was performed before the Sultan. The ambassador, honored and flattered, dismissed all suspicions. Layla survived the map that never existed. Her greatest coup came not from a conversation, but from observation. In the spring of 1271, Baybars began preparing a secret campaign, a surprise siege of Jaffa. No courier spoke of it, no document mentioned it. But Layla noticed changes, maps unrolled late at night, the sudden presence of new engineers, crates of dried figs arriving unseasonably early. She understood the rhythm of movement in the palace, like a musician reads tempo. From a single glance at a guard's tunic, stained with Jaffa sand, from the absence of a certain naval commander from the morning courtyard, Layla deduced the plan. She encoded the warning in a verse of love poetry, a tale of a lost sailor seeking home in the arms of a city named for sunrise, Jaffa. The poem reached the Templars via the merchant weeks before the assault. Thanks to her, the garrison in Jaffa had time to prepare. The city did not fall. The Sultan never learned how the Franks had known. The vanishing, and then Layla vanished. Some say she was discovered and executed in secret. Others believe she escaped under the cover of a merchant caravan, her veil replaced with a hood, her silks traded for wool. A Templar record dated 1272 mentions a sister of the veil arriving in Cyprus, fluent in Arabic, granted sanctuary in a monastery overlooking the sea. No one knows her fate, but her legend remained passed down not in books, but in whispers among Templar novices, told as both caution and reverence. Reflections beneath the stars. Layla al-Rumiyya is not found in any official Templar roster, for the order did not publicly acknowledge women among its ranks, and yet covert roles existed disguised, unrecorded, but vital. The Lady of the Cloth, as some manuscripts hint, included women who served as informants, healers, translators, and occasionally spies. The idea of embedding an agent within the enemy's most sacred circle was radical, even sacrilegious to many. But war, especially one waged in shadows, requires more than swords. What Layla accomplished, she did not do with violence. She used memory, wit, patience, and trust. Her work saved lives, changed outcomes, and yet she remained unseen. Perhaps she wanted it that way. Perhaps true espionage leaves no trace at all. A quiet ending now as you drift into the stillness of night. Let your mind wander the candlelit halls of Cairo. Picture the soft jingle of bangles as Layla moved past columns of alabaster. Imagine her sitting beneath a lattice window, listening. Not to be entertained, but to protect a kingdom she would never rule, for people who would never know her name. She was not a knight, not a saint, but she was the blade behind the veil, the ink beneath the perfume. And in the long silence of forgotten history, her story still breathes. 3. The Inquisitor's Mirror. A Templar spy sit among the papal court. It was said that no place in Christendom held more silence than the corridors of the papal palace. Not the silence of peace, but of secrets. A silence that buzzed beneath the polished stone with every whispered pen stroke, every locked door, every quiet judgment passed not by sword, but by seal. Here, amid the incense and Latin psalms, among the scrolls and solemn robes, walked a man known only as Brother Lucien. To the cardinals he was a scribe, quiet, devout, always present in the shadows of ecclesiastical meetings, always ready with fresh parchment and ink mixed with wine. He bowed low, spoke little, and disappeared before remembered. But like the flickering of a candle seen from the corner of one's eye, there was something off, because Brother Lucien was not truly a brother. He was a Templar, and he had been sent into the lion's mouth. The smoke before the fire. The year was 1306, and storm clouds gathered over Vurs, the order of the Temple. In France, King Philip IV, Philip the Fair, had begun to murmur against the Templars. Accusations of heresy, of secrecy, of ungodly rites were whispered into the ears of the faithful. And worse, the Pope had begun to listen. Pope Clement V, once a man of neutrality, had been pressured by the crown. Behind closed doors in Avignon, cardinals debated not over doctrine, but over the future of the most powerful knightly order in the world. The Templars needed to know what was coming not from the battlefield, but from the parchment. And so they called upon Lucien, the man with no past. Lucien had once been a student of rhetoric in Bologna, a gifted mind with a monk's temperament and a spy's patience. Years prior, He had entered the Templar preceptory in Provence, not as a knight, but as a lay brother. His weapons were memory, languages, and humility. For 5 years, he had studied canon law and ecclesiastical decorum. He had copied decrees, memorized protocols, learned the rhythm of papal councils. And then, when the moment came, he shaved his crown, darkened his robe, and entered Avignon's inner sanctum as a wandering Benedictine scribe. No one questioned him. He had no enemies. He smiled with lowered eyes, and he listened to the mirror on the wall. His most powerful tool was not a dagger or a cipher. It was a mirror. Hung innocently behind a lectern, angled just so, it captured the reflection of the Pope's private table, where confidential letters were sometimes read aloud between meetings. Lucian, pretending to arrange scrolls nearby, could observe the expressions, the reactions, and more importantly, the contents. One afternoon, he witnessed the unsealing of a parchment bearing the royal sigil of France. The Pope paled. The words spoken were few, but heavy. They seek blood, not truth. Lucien knew then the wheels had turned. The king was preparing to arrest the entire order. The Vatican would not stop him. The quill and the sandal. That night, in a chamber lit only by a dying taper, Lucian transcribed a coded message using the Templars' internal system of liturgical substitution, where each verse of a psalm stood for a specific phrase. To outsiders, it read as a common devotion to Saint Bernard. To the trained, it was a warning. A seal's broken. France moves. Delay futile. Disband quietly or prepare consequence. He folded the parchment and inserted it between the soles of his sandal, stitched into the leather. He walked on foot from Avignon to Montpellier. No horse, no companion. A false monk traveling to visit a sick abbot. In Montpellier, a Templar contact received the message and rode swiftly to Paris. The Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, received the warning, yet he could not believe it. How could the Church, the very pillar they had defended for 2 centuries, betray them? 1 year later, on Friday the 13th of October, in 07, the arrests began. The last candle. Lucien was never seen again in Avignon. Some say he was discovered. Others say he returned to a Templar monastery and lived in silence, watching as the world he had tried to protect was consumed by flames in trials. But among the secret scrolls uncovered in 18th century Paris, within the archives of the former temple, was a single anonymous letter. Its ink faded, but the Latin legible. Fili lucis oculis non dormint, custodientes inter verba, non inter gladios, in silentio, in memoria, in fide. The sons of light do not sleep with their eyes. They guard between the words, not the swords, in silence, in memory, in faith. Some believe it was Lucien's final message. Historical reflection. The cloak behind the mitre. Brother Lucien's tale, while shaped by narrative, finds roots in real history. By the early 14th century, the relationship between the Templars and the papacy had soured. Pope Clement V's court in Avignon became the epicenter of political maneuvering, with King Philip IV leveraging enormous pressure on the Church. Espionage was not uncommon, even among ecclesiastics. Secretaries, scribes, and messengers often bore dual loyalties. Hidden messages were encoded within psalms or theological commentaries, an established method known from recovered manuscripts of the time. While we may never confirm the existence of Lucien himself, the Avignon silence, as some historians call him, remains a curious gap in the records. Several correspondences between the Pope and French court remain missing or were deliberately destroyed. And as history reminds us, wherever silence grows thickest, something was surely hidden. Close your eyes. Imagine now the cool stone under Lucien's sandals, the quiet echo of sandals on marble as he walked past cloistered chambers. Picture the flickering of candlelight on ancient scrolls, and the subtle glance in a mirror revealing what no one was meant to see. Lucien did not draw a sword. He did not stand on a battlefield. But in the war of shadows, he was a knight of light. His quill, his silence, his faith. These were his weapons. Sleep now, and let the echoes of hidden ink and whispered truth carry you gently into dreams. For the monastery vault, hidden messages, beneath the abbey stones. There is a monastery in the hills of Burgundy, cloaked in ivy and the slow breath of centuries. Its stones are worn smooth by the touch of time. The monks who walk its halls today speak in hushed tones, unaware that beneath their sandaled feet lies a secret tone so carefully hidden, it outlived the very order that created it. It is said that when the Templars fell, not all was lost, not all was captured. Much was simply buried, but not in treasure chests, not beneath towers or inside castles. Instead, the order turned to the most sacred of places, monasteries, where silence was law, prayer was rhythm, and outsiders never lingered too long. This is the story of one such hiding place, a tale not of gold, but of message layered in stone, concealed in scripture, kept alive by habit, not by design. And it begins with a single monk who never spoke a word, the silent brother of Vézelay. In the autumn of 1307, mere weeks after the arrest of Grand Master Jacques de Molay, a monk arrived at the Abbey of Vézelay. He was pale, young, and mute. His robes were simple, his hands rough. He claimed no name. The abbot, though suspicious, welcomed him in those times. The church was shelter for the broken. He was assigned to the scriptorium copying scripture, tending ink, and sweeping floors at night. But what none of the brothers realized was that he had been trained for this. Every letter he copied was carefully chosen. Every margin he wrote in was filled not just with verse, but with code. This silent brother, whose real name has been lost, was one of the last couriers of the Templar secret network. His task was clear: bury the names, the records, and the messages in a place no soldier would ever think to search, beneath prayer. And so he went to work not with haste, but with devotion. The psalter that wasn't in the library of the abbey, hidden among hundreds of handwritten texts, rested a single psalterone that no one read, because it was said to be incomplete. Pages were missing. The lettering was odd. The music lines were crooked. But this was no accident. The psalter was a cipher ledger. Each musical note corresponded to a Latin numeral. The margins included flourishes that, when viewed under candlelight from a particular angle, formed geometric diagrams maps. The mute brother had constructed a layered message, names of surviving Templar leaders, the locations of scattered funds, the instructions for rebuilding, if the world allowed it. All of it was embedded within a fake songbook, written in plain view. The manuscript was then buried within the lower vault of the abbey. A single loose tile on the floor, beneath the choir stall, marked its place. But even that mark was itself hidden. The tile was identical in pattern, but subtly misaligned a half-turn in its central cross. Only someone who had been told to look for it would ever notice. The monk, who never left for 20 more years, the silent brother, remained at Vézelay. He never took vows, he never advanced in rank, he simply stayed. He was called Brother Angelus, for he rang the bell at dawn and dusk, never once missing a chime, never once arriving late. He copied a dozen more texts. Some believed he had a gift for beauty, for his illuminations were haunting, angels whose wings held runes, saints whose eyes were slightly turned toward invisible stars. None of the monks ever suspected, but when he died, quietly, in his cell one snowy morning, the abbey mourned not a spy but a saint. He had never spoken a harsh word, never asked for anything, only prayed and painted and served. They buried him beneath the very tile he had marked. Without knowing, they sealed the secret with his body. The rediscovery centuries passed. The abbey fell to disrepair. Wars came and went. The French Revolution closed its doors. But in 1894, a group of scholars began restoring Vézelay's cloisters. While lifting the choir tiles to reinforce the foundations, a mason noticed something unusual: a perfectly preserved psalter tucked into a stone cavity, wrapped in waxed linen. The pages were dry, the ink untouched. At first, they believed it a lost songbook of the 13th century. But a musicologist, examining the oddities of the notes, noticed that it followed no known melody. And then, a historian recognized something chilling. One of the diagrams matched the layout of an abandoned Templar chapel in Spain. The psalter was not music. It was a map of silence. Echoes of truth. To this day, the psalter rests in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, locked within glass. It is studied, admired, and debated. But only a few realize what it truly is: a last breath from a vanished world. A message sent forward not in ink, but in faith. The Abbey of Vézelay now welcomes tourists. They walk over the very stones where secrets once breathed. Some pause, some take photographs, but few know that beneath their feet lies a vault of memory guarded by silence and prayer. Brother Angelus, nameless though he was, ensured that even in the darkest hour, this order would leave behind more than rumor. He left behind hope, historical notes, fact beneath fiction. There is strong evidence that many monasteries served as shelters for fleeing Templars during and after the suppression. Some monks were former knights. Others sympathized with the order's mission. Encrypted manuscripts from the 13th, 14th centuries have been found across France and Spain, bearing unusual musical notations, marginalia filled with cryptic symbols, and embedded maps. While many are dismissed as coincidence or art, some scholars argue they represent a form of musical steganography, messages hidden within songs. Vézelay itself was a center of pilgrimage and held political importance during the Crusades. Though no official records confirm a Templar vault there, fragments of stained glass bearing Templar crosses and incomplete manuscripts suggest an undercurrent of forgotten presence. And now, let go. Imagine now the candlelight dancing on vellum pages, the hush of monastic chanting echoing in stone halls, the breath of Brother Angelus as he silently paints truth into a saint's halo, the weight of a secret not shouted but sealed in devotion. Not every knight bore arms, some bore silence, and in doing so, they carried a legacy no fire could burn. The ship that never returned, the Templar fleet's vanishing act. It was the dawn of October 13th, 1307, a Friday. In the port of La Rochelle, where salt clung to stone and the cries of gulls tangled with the tolling of distant bells, something stirred before the world awoke. 10 ships, dark-sailed, fully stocked, and utterly silent. As the city prepared to rise, they had already vanished. No sailor gave report. No port record marked their passage. No witness remembered seeing them pass the horizon. The Templar fleet, once the pride of a military order, with harbors across Europe, had disappeared without a trace. This is not legend. This is not myth. This is a hole in history large enough to swallow the truth. And tonight, we drift into that hole-worn ship at a time. A warning ignored. The arrests of the Knights Templar were swift, calculated, and brutal. King Philip IV of France had orchestrated the move with chilling precision. In one stroke, he aimed to seize the wealth, silence the secrets, and crush the autonomy of an order too powerful to be controlled. Yet somehow, La Rochelle, the Templars' primary Atlantic port, stood empty when the king's men arrived. No gold, no archive, no fleet, just cold stone and unanswered questions. How? Because someone had warned them. The man from the tower. Weeks earlier, a young Templar scribe stationed in Paris overheard fragments of a royal conversation, not enough to prove treason, but enough to smell it. He fled the city at night, riding not to the nearest preceptory, but to Chartres Cathedral, where a senior Templar known only as Frere Meridius waited in secret. Meridius had long suspected a betrayal. For months, he had coordinated the Protocol Silence, a series of orders sent not by courier, but through hidden codes in church donations, merchant inventories, and even musical notations carried by minstrels. When the warning came, Meridius triggered the plan, and the fleet waiting for years in quiet readiness was unmoored under cover of dense fog and high tide. They carried not just treasure, but maps, documents, names, seeds of survival. The vanishing. The question that haunts every historian is not simply why the fleet left, but where it went. Some say they sailed to Scotland, where Robert the Bruce, excommunicated at the time, would have welcomed any enemy of Rome. Others whisper of a voyage west, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, guided by ancient maps brought from the Holy Land maps said to predate even the Norse. There is a legend among Basque fishermen that a silent fleet passed the Cantabrian coast in late autumn, refusing harbor, leaving behind only a single iron Templar cross nailed to a piece of driftwood found at sunrise. There is an account in a 14th century Portuguese logbook that describes French ships seen heading into uncharted waters, carrying men who spoke little but bore the Red Cross with honor. And there are those who believe the fleet found land, not in Europe, not in Africa, but somewhere else. The map in the monastery. In 1742, in a remote Carthusian monastery in the Pyrenees, a friar cataloging old books discovered a strange manuscript bound in dark leather, bearing no author, no title. Within were star charts, compass directions, and coastal outlines that did not match known geography. But one margin held a note: Terra Incognita, where the silence of God is loudest. Some believe it to be a poetic reference to spiritual solitude. Others argue it was a record of a voyage, one that crossed the Atlantic before Columbus was born. The final page bore a single sigil, the cross pate of the Templars, encircled by a rope tied in an unbroken loop. No explanation was ever offered. The book now lies buried in an archive labeled Miscellanea Symbolica. Echoes across the sea. Among the Algonquin of North America, early Jesuit missionaries recorded the tale of pale-skinned visitors who came before the black robes. These men, they said, brought no weapons, only symbols, a cross of 4 arms, and silence. Among the Mi'kmaq, there is an oral story of stone towers on the coast that were there before the French, but built by men with stars on their clothes and red on their shields. Skeptics call it coincidence, but the shoreline of Nova Scotia bears curious ruined stone crosses, half-buried walls, inscriptions in medieval Latin. And somewhere, hidden among the trees of Oak Island, treasure hunters still dig, whispering of the Templar vault. Perhaps they are wrong, but perhaps they are decades too late. The return in other forms. What happened to the Templar fleet? Perhaps it sank. Perhaps it found refuge and was slowly absorbed into other navies. Perhaps it became myth, because that's what happens to stories no one dares to explain. But what if the fleet was not meant to return? What if it was a seed cast into the wind not to reclaim power, but to preserve memory? The Templars knew their fall would be inevitable. They also knew that ideas unlike stone could sail, and in that final voyage they launched more than ships. They launched hope, encrypted in silence, carried by tide, preserved by time. Historical roots beneath the waves. The disappearance of the Templar fleet is one of history's great enigmas. Contemporary records confirm that the fleet at La Rochelle existed and was active, yet after October 1307, it is never mentioned again in official French or papal documents. Given the detail with which the arrests were planned, it is curious, almost suspicious, that the port was empty. Some historians argue that it was a logistical oversight. Others believe that members of the order had long suspected a coming purge and had spent years preparing for flight. Modern research has uncovered coded letters, sea charts, and even property deeds in England and Portugal referencing unnamed ships and sealed cargo. Whether these belonged to the Templar or were attributed to them in the fog of legend remains uncertain. But history, as always, leaves just enough breadcrumbs to keep the question alive. Close your eyes and sail. Now, let your breath match the rhythm of the tide. Feel the wooden planks beneath your feet. Hear the sails creak in the ocean wind. You are aboard the ship that never returned, a vessel without name, without anchor, but with purpose. It carries not just gold or maps, but you, your imagination, your wonder, your willingness to believe that sometimes the truth does not shout its sails in silence. Sleep now, as the ship drifts into mist. 6. The Book of Ashes, the lost grimoire of the Templar alchemist. In the depths of the Templar monastery at Aragon, buried beneath layers of stone and candle smoke, there once lived a man cloaked not in armor, but in symbols, not in prayers, but in fire. He was known only as Dominus Ignis, Master of Fire. Few ever saw his face, fewer still remembered his voice, but among the Templars he was both feared and revered. A scholar of the stars, of metals, of the soul. He did not ride into battle. He stayed behind in the shadows of cathedrals, where crucibles burned and symbols whispered their ancient secrets. And once, he wrote a book, a single volume, bound in ash-dyed leather, its ink laced with powdered gold and plant oil, its pages warm to the touch as if it remembered the fire that birthed it. The Templars called it Liber Cineris, the Book of Ashes. And then it vanished. The alchemist of the cross. Dominus Ignis was said to be a Templar initiated not through combat, but through silence. He entered the order as a healer, versed in the medicines of the East. But he carried with him something far older than any herb, the knowledge of transmutation. Not merely the transmutation of lead into gold, but of fear into strength, ignorance into wisdom, soul into light. In the ruins of Antioch, he had uncovered fragments of ancient scrolls. From Arab physicians and Jewish mystics, he pieced together a system of alchemy that blended the physical with the divine. The Templars, ever pragmatic, allowed his experiments. For years, he was left alone in the lower chambers of the Aragonese monastery, surrounded by glass vials, rare minerals, and charts of the heavens inked with planetary sigils. He recorded everything, but never in plain words. His writings were disguised as psalms, his diagrams hidden in the curls of marginal saints, his formulas bound in verses that only the trained eye could read. And in the final days of the order, when the Great Purge swept across France and Spain, he compiled his knowledge into one single manuscript. Liber Cineris. It was never meant to be read by the unready. It was a key, a path, a warning, the disappearance. In 1311, the Inquisition arrived at Aragon. They searched every vault, every scroll, every brother's cell. Dominus Ignis did not resist. He burned his lesser books, scattered his notes, and walked quietly to the cloister, where he sat in meditation, never rising again. The monks buried him beneath the apse, marking the stone with a simple carving. 8. In pulverem reverteris. And to dust thou shalt return. But the Book of Ashes was gone. Some said he had burned it. Others believed it was taken by a faithful novice, one who had memorized its structure, who escaped in the night with nothing but a satchel of herbs and a torn page tucked into his sleeve. The page in Prague. Centuries later, in 1603, a Bohemian occultist named Johannes Olmütz presented a strange vellum sheet to Emperor Rudolf II. It bore a circular diagram, 7 rings, each marked with Templar crosses, planetary sigils, and verses from Psalm 119 written backward. Olmütz claimed the page came from a book found inside a Spanish reliquary, hidden beneath layers of fake relics and hollowed saints' bones. The page, when placed over a flame, revealed hidden writing in red ink, instructions for an alchemical ritual to turn base flesh into light. The emperor was fascinated. The page vanished into his private cabinet of curiosities. Today, that collection, scattered across Europe, holds no trace of the page. But among the surviving records is a single marginal note written by an archivist. Talis pagina periculosissima, igne nata, igne abscondita. Such a page is most dangerous, born of fire, hidden by fire. A whisper in the ashes. More fragments of Liber Scinaris have surfaced since, one in a Dutch convent used as binding for a hymnal, another in a Parisian apothecary, passed off as a dream journal. But never the full book. Each fragment offers strange wisdom. One reads, "The soul is a furnace. What you place in it, you become. Gold is not found, it is remembered." Another, more cryptic, "He who understands the silence of salt knows the language of stars." These are not spells, not charms. They are keys. But the lock, it seems, no longer exists. Or perhaps it waits in a place none dare look. Within. Echoes in history. The story of Dominus Ignis is not isolated. Throughout Templar archives are references to the Hermetic Cell, the Silent Sanctum, and the Keepers of Sulphur. These were believed to be fringe thinkers, tolerated but never celebrated, tasked with preserving the ancient philosophical streams that passed through East and West alike. Historians have debated whether the Templars truly dabbled in alchemy. What is known, they traveled widely, traded with Arab scholars, and held vast libraries. They were exposed to ideas far older than Catholic orthodoxy, and many of their writings, what survived the fires of suppression, bear curious annotations, symbols, and structural choices that suggest dual meanings. Even the Inquisition, in its reports, noted a troubling presence of books with unclear language and images not suitable for godly men. In truth, the greatest threat the Templars may have posed was not their wealth, but their knowledge. Liber Scinaris was not destroyed. It simply became ash, waiting for a mind to reform it. The dream of fire. Now, as your eyes grow heavy, imagine a small room beneath stone arches. A candle burns low. A hooded figure writes, not in haste, but in certainty. He hums softly, mixing crushed saffron with powdered bone, drawing a circle not on the floor, but in thought. He knows the order may fall, but the truth will not, because truth is flame, and flame once lit moves through time. You carry it now. As you sleep, let that fire glow gently within you, not to consume, but to illuminate. Sleep now, dreamer. The Book of Ashes may yet find you. 7. The Glass Cipher. The Secret. Hidden in the Templar windows, not all books are made of paper. Not all messages are written in ink. Some are painted in light. In a quiet chapel just outside Toulouse, there stands a forgotten window. Dusty, cracked, half hidden behind a crumbling column. Most visitors pass it without notice, but to those who know, it is a relic, a cipher, a story told not with words, but with colors and glass. This is not just a window. It is a Templar code. One left behind not for the forces, but for the few. Tonight, we follow that trail of colored light, through sun and shadow, through cathedral and silence, into one of the most exquisite, least understood espionage tools the Templars ever used, the glass cipher. A language of light. The Templars were architects as much as warriors. Across Europe, they raised chapels and commanderies with uncanny precision. Their buildings faced specific stars, aligned with solstices, echoed sacred geometry drawn from ancient traditions. And in some of these structures, particularly those built in France and the Iberian Peninsula, they commissioned stained glass windows unlike any others. These weren't merely depictions of saints or biblical scenes. They were codes, hidden in the arrangement of colors, in the positions of the figures, in the direction of a pointing hand or the angle of a sheep's eye. To the casual worshiper, these windows told the stories of Christ and his disciples. To the initiated, they whispered secrets. The window of the crossed rays. In 1305, a Templar architect named Brother Allard de Foix oversaw the construction of a small rural chapel near Toulouse. It was meant to serve as a place of rest for knights returning from the Mediterranean campaigns. But the chapel's most unusual feature was a tall, narrow window of colored glass, placed not at the altar, but at the west-facing wall, opposite the setting sun. The window bore no saints, no angels, just abstract patterns, triangles, stars, blue crescents, red keys. At noon, the light passed harmlessly through, but at dusk on Midsummer's Eve, the setting sun pierced the window at just the right angle and cast a series of colored patterns onto the floor. Witnesses wrote that the floor lit up like a page of illuminated scripture made of fire. But the real brilliance was in where the light landed. The colored shapes aligned perfectly with 7 carved floor tiles, each bearing an engraved letter. Put together, they spelled Aventum, a Latin word meaning arrival, or he comes. What did it mean? To some, it was a spiritual message. To the Templars, it was a signal. A message of movement documents uncovered centuries later reveal that Aventum was one of several code words used by the Templars to signal the arrival of an envoy, a high-ranking brother carrying sensitive information. The placement of the light pattern acted as a signal to those within the chapel. If the pattern formed correctly, the arrival was safe. If it failed or landed elsewhere, the envoy had been compromised. The system could only be read on 2 days of the year, June 21st and December 21st, ensuring that only those trained in the cipher and present at the right moment could interpret the message. A window, a sunbeam, a word written in light, silent, brilliant, invisible to the untrained. The disguised language of saints. The glass cipher did not rely only on patterns. Templar glaziers were known to embed minor differences into religious imagery that carried alternate meaning, a figure of St. Peter holding 2 keys instead of 1, code for a hidden vault or passage, a sheep with its head turned to the left, a warning of betrayal, a halo made of 7 red shards rather than gold, a reference to the 7 seals of the order. These messages were passed in plain sight, visible to every pilgrim, every noble, and yet understood by none but those with the right eyes. It was camouflage by beauty. The chapel that was sealed. One such window existed in the chapel of Saint-Benoît-sur-Loire, long suspected of Templar construction. After the order's fall in 1307, the entire chapel was walled up, its windows sealed behind stone. It remained untouched for nearly 500 years. Then, in 1811, a fire damaged part of the abbey, revealing the forgotten chamber. Inside was a single glass window, intact, untouched. It depicted a ship sailing west, guided by a star of 8 points, above waves formed not by blue glass but by tiny Templar crosses. Beneath it, a Latin phrase, Lux ita est, non omnes vident, Light is the path not all can see. Some believe it was a reference to the Templar fleet's escape. Others think it pointed to a secret sanctuary, perhaps across the sea. The window was carefully removed. Today it rests in a vault in the Louvre, labeled simply, Early 14th Century Stained Glass, Anonymous Artisan. Its secrets remain unspoken. Reflections of truth. Historians have long debated whether the Templars truly used stained glass as an espionage tool. Skeptics argue the complexity of creating such messages would have been impractical. But the Templars were not ordinary builders. Their use of sacred geometry, their mastery of light and structure, their connections to Eastern mysticism, all point to a deeper symbolic intelligence. They understood that the safest message is the one no one thinks is a message at all. In a time of surveillance and suspicion, beauty became the perfect disguise, and light became the perfect courier. Sleep beneath the window. Now, let your mind rest beneath those colored panes. Let your breath match the rhythm of candlelight flickering through sapphire and ruby glass. Imagine a figure kneeling before a window, not in prayer, but in understanding. The sun shifts, the colors bloom, the message appears and vanishes. No word spoken, no sound heard, only light and meaning. As you drift into sleep, remember, some stories are not told. They are shown in color, in silence, in the secret dance between shadow and sun. 8. The Templars' Reflection. Secrets etched in mirror and metal. Not all truth is meant to be read. Some truth is meant to be seen, then vanish. And what vanishes leaves its most powerful mark behind. Among the many tools used by the Templars, codes in glass, signals in song, prayers encrypted in psalms, there existed another, far stranger, far subtler, a reflection. This is the tale of the Templar mirrors, plates of polished bronze or silver, etched with seemingly random patterns. But when viewed at the right angle, in the right light, from the right soul, they whispered secrets across centuries. This is the story of the Templars' reflection, the mirror that didn't reflect. In 1310, deep within the Pyrenean borderlands, a Templar stronghold known as Commanderie de Sainte-Croix was sacked by royal agents. Most of the brothers were arrested. The chapel was sealed, but one object, carefully wrapped in lambskin, was smuggled out by a novice named Guillaume. It was small, circular, made of darkened bronze, no wider than a bread plate. At first glance, it was nothing more than an old mirror, its surface dulled, almost matte. It reflected neither candle nor eye, but Guillaume had been told, "Hold it near flame, wait for the line." And so he did. By firelight, alone in the ruins of a nearby barn, Guillaume watched. At first, nothing. Then, a glimmer, a shimmering curve, then another. Slowly, the mirror began to reveal a pattern, not on its surface, but within it. Not an image, not a symbol, but a map. Etched in reverse Templar mirrors were crafted by skilled metalworkers trained in Eastern techniques. Methods passed through the Holy Land from Damascus, from Baghdad, from India. The art was called specular engraving. Lines etched so finely, so shallowly, that they were invisible in normal light. But when heated gently by flame or warmed by breath, the oils from the air would briefly cling to the grooves, forming a picture that lasted only moments. Even more cunning, the images were reversed. To read them clearly, one had to place the mirror beside another mirror, creating a double reflection that revealed the true design. Only those who knew the process could ever see what lay hidden. And even then, it would vanish within seconds. A message carried by heat, light, and air. A reflection that refused to stay. The sanctuary of the second face. One such mirror was said to have hung inside the sacristy of a now ruined chapel in Burgos, Spain. Pilgrims claimed that when the room was lit at dawn on the summer solstice, a strange halo of light would appear on the far Malzier, shaped like a Templar cross. For years, the story was dismissed as legend. But in 1993, during restoration efforts, a small bronze disc was discovered embedded in the plaster, its face smooth, its back inscribed with two words, Videre iterum, see again. Researchers used low-angle lighting to examine the surface and found microscopic channels forming a spiral. When a candle was placed beside it and the room darkened, the spiral unfurled into a constellation chart, matching the night sky of October 13th, 1307, the night of the Templar arrests. Below it, 3 reversed letters, a place name perhaps, or a name erased from time. The mirror now sits in the archives of Madrid, unmarked, under glass. But it remembers the light. Reflections that lied. Not all Templar mirrors revealed truth. Some were crafted to mislead. One tale tells of a mirror gifted to a French inquisitor during the trials. It bore a faint Templar seal and was claimed to reveal the heresies of the order. He gazed into it nightly, expecting visions of evil. What he saw instead were shifting shapes, distorted shadows, fragments of Latin verse, and burning towers. Some say it drove him into obsession. He withdrew from public life, speaking only of the other world behind the world. Historians now believe it was a trap, a mirror designed to reflect the fears of the viewer, not reality. An early form of psychological warfare in polished metal. Reflections in history. The concept of encoded mirrors is not unique to the Templars. In ancient China, artisans crafted magic mirrors that, when light was reflected from their surface onto a wall, revealed hidden images etched into the metal. The principle was lost for centuries and only rediscovered by modern science. In the Arab world, polished metal was used as a medium for diagrams and cosmological symbols. Many such plates were inscribed in reverse, suggesting they were meant to be read through a reflection. The Templars, with their wide reach and cultural curiosity, likely encountered and adapted these practices, not for vanity, but for secrecy. Because what better place to hide a message than in plain sight on something people avoid looking too closely at? A mirror forces one to confront the self. A Templar mirror forces one to look beyond. Sleep in the reflection. Now close your eyes. Imagine a room lit by a single flame. A hand reaches out. A disc, cool and dark, warms in the flicker of light. Shapes emerge. A name appears, then vanishes. You are left with silence, but somehow you understand. You have seen the message. You do not need to speak it. It was never meant to be shouted, only reflected. Sleep now, gentle traveler of time. The mirror has closed, but the light remains somewhere within. The candle has burned low. The echoes of ancient footsteps have faded into silence. And here, at the edge of night, we close the last page, not with a shout, but with a breath. Through these 8 tales, we did not march alongside armies or witness battles written in blood. Instead, we walked beside shadows. We listened to voices that history forgot. We followed secrets carried not by trumpet and war drum, but by light, memory, and silence. We met the messenger who spoke with no voice, the courtesan who traded beauty for truth, the scribe who watched from behind a mirror, the monk who buried a book beneath his own grave, the fleet that vanished into fog and legend, the alchemist who wrote in ashes, the windows that sang in color, and the mirror that did not show a face, but revealed something far more lasting. Each story was a thread. Together, they wove a tapestry of quiet resistance, quiet devotion, and quiet genius. And now, the loom rests. Perhaps none of these tales can be proven. Perhaps the truth lies not in parchment or stone, but in the space between candle flickers, in the hush between a bell's toll and the silence that follows. What the Templars left behind may not have been gold, it may not have been power, but it was something rarer still, a way of seeing, a way of remembering, a way of speaking without being heard, of carrying light where no one thought to look. So if you are listening to this with your eyes growing heavy, let it be known, you do not need to remember every detail. You only need to carry the feeling that somewhere, once, brave souls guarded the sacred not with swords, but with silence. And in their silence, they left echoes. Thank you for walking this quiet path with us. If these stories have stirred something in you, an ancient longing, a stillness, a wonder, consider staying with us. Subscribe to the channel, and together we will explore more forgotten corners of history, more gentle voices, more mysteries meant not to be solved, but simply to be heard. And now, rest. If you dream of a ship lost in mist, a stained glass window glowing in strange patterns, or a mirror that does not reflect your face but whispers your name, smile. You have been here before. Good night, traveler of shadows. Sleep well. The story waits.